The corporate gala was designed to impress. Chandeliers the size of cars hung from the ceiling, and the scent of imported roses mixed with expensive perfume lingered in the air. Every corner of the room sparkled with people who believed status was measured not by character, but by the weight of their jewelry. It was the kind of event where laughter sounded like transactions and conversations felt like negotiations. I stood quietly near the buffet table, holding a glass of water and watching the spectacle unfold, feeling more like an observer than a participant. On my left hand rested a simple silver ring, the only physical memory I carried of my late father. It wasn't decorative. It wasn't trendy. But it was priceless to me. I traced its edge unconsciously, thinking about how he always told me that value came from meaning, not attention. That philosophy was out of place in a room where every nod had an agenda. I wasn't dressed poorly, but compared to the diamond-encrusted watches and tailored suits around me, my presence blended into the background. I didn't mind. My focus was on my work and legacy, not on climbing social ladders built on fragile egos. Then Vanessa appeared, escorted by a cluster of admirers who laughed at every breath she took. She walked as if the floor belonged to her, her confidence loud and unearned. Her father was the vice president of the company, and she wielded that connection like a crown. Without warning, she stopped beside me and stared at my hand as though she spotted an insect. Her lips curled into a smirk, and in a voice dripping with contempt, she asked if my ring came from a vending machine. Her friends burst into laughter, and the sound spread through the room like wildfire. I felt the humiliation strike deeper than her words. Not because she insulted me, but because she mocked something sacred without understanding its worth. My colleagues averted their eyes, unwilling to defend someone who didn't play their social game. Vanessa flipped her hair, believing she had delivered the joke of the evening. She didn't know that every mockery reveals a truth, and hers revealed her ignorance. That ring wasn't decoration. It was legacy. Her laughter became the first crack in a wall she didn't know existed, and it was only a matter of time before something powerful pushed it down. Monday arrived with the weight of unresolved mockery hanging over the office. As soon as I stepped through the glass doors, conversation shifted and eyes flicked toward my hand as if the ring itself had become a scandal. People who once greeted me with professional courtesy now exchanged smirks when they thought I wasn't looking. Vanessa had transformed a harmless moment into an office-wide spectacle. What happened at the gala hadn't stayed in that ballroom. It had metastasized into gossip hungry for fuel. Vanessa moved through the corridors as if she had authored a masterpiece of humiliation. She made snide comments within earshot, comparing my ring to bottle caps and claiming I wore sentiment instead of success. Her friends laughed at every remark, eager to align themselves with the VP's daughter. Her father wasn't any better. Each time he passed my desk, he offered a smirk sharp enough to cut. He never spoke directly, but his silence carried a message. I was no longer seen as a colleague. I was entertainment. Meetings became battlegrounds. My ideas, once praised for clarity and foresight, were now interrupted before they were fully voiced. When I presented documents, Vanessa's circle whispered loudly enough to distract the room. The VP questioned my projections without reading a single page, treating logic as optional and hierarchy as truth. I realized that competence didn't matter anymore. Perception had replaced performance, and my value was being rewritten by people who didn't understand my work, let alone my history. Yet something curious began happening. My refusal to retaliate confused them. I completed tasks with quiet precision, avoided confrontations, and maintained professional composure. They interpreted my calm as surrender. They believed humiliation had defeated me. What they didn't know is that silence has a powerful purpose. It listens. It observes. It remembers. While they celebrated their petty victories, I noticed inconsistencies in reports, missing signatures, unapproved expenditures, and financial trails that didn't align with the numbers presented to the board. Their arrogance made them careless. They were so focused on winning a social battle that they ignored the structural weaknesses around them. Vanessa treated the office like a stage. Her father treated authority like armor. They were both convinced I was beneath them, unaware they were stacking their own downfall brick by brick. Their laughter wasn't progress. It was distance traveled toward a cliff they didn't even know existed. The gossip machine inside the company reached full speed by midweek. What started as mocking whispers evolved into a narrative that painted me as a relic in a modern world. People repeated the same words with disturbing confidence, calling me broke, accusing me of lacking ambition, and insisting I wore poverty jewelry because I couldn't afford anything better. Vanessa turned the ridicule into a personal project. She created memes, edited photos of rusty rings next to my hand, and laughed loudly each time someone shared them. For her, belittlement had become a form of entertainment. She never questioned why I never reacted. She never wondered if the ring had a story. For her, value was measured in price tags and glitter, not history or meaning. She had no idea who my father was or the world he moved in. He never chased attention, never sat for magazine covers, and never needed a public spotlight. He was the kind of man people consulted silently, whose handshake sealed projects no one else could even imagine. The alliances he forged became the foundations of cities, ports, bridges, and networks still functioning long after his name slipped from headlines. He didn't need applause. He built legacies. The ring he left me wasn't decoration. It was a symbol, one that represented access few people ever earned. It wasn't purchased, it was bestowed. Engraved inside the band were initials only a select group would recognize, initials tied to contracts, land holdings, and silent partnerships worth more than the combined annual salaries of everyone mocking me. But ignorance amplifies arrogance. Vanessa saw only metal, not meaning. She saw a circle, not a door. My father once told me something that echoed louder with every taunt. Real wealth whispers, while insecurity screams. He believed power served a purpose, not an ego. He didn't raise me to chase status. He raised me to understand it. While the office fixated on appearances, I focused on timing. Silence wasn't avoidance. It was positioning. I watched as Vanessa dug deeper into her performance of superiority, unaware that every laugh had consequences. The day was approaching when the ring would no longer be a joke. It would become a revelation, a statement, and a reckoning. Their assumptions built a narrative, but narratives crumble when truth awakens. They believed the ring made me small. They were about to learn it made me untouchable. 2 weeks after the mockery reached its peak, the office atmosphere shifted without warning. The CEO, known for his calm demeanor, stormed into the boardroom with a face drained of color. He held a message printed on company letterhead, and the urgency in his voice echoed down the hallway. A billionaire investor, one whose wealth was whispered about in financial circles, but rarely discussed openly, wanted an immediate meeting. No slide decks, no quarterly projections, no rehearsed pitches. He demanded a single condition, a line that sent confusion rippling through every executive present. I want the man with the silver ring present. Silence strangled the room. People looked around, unsure if they heard correctly. At first, the board members assumed it was a mistake. Investors usually requested CFOs, strategists, or the CEO himself, not an employee they believed insignificant. The VP attempted a chuckle, brushing it off as some eccentric request from a wealthy eccentric. Vanessa, overhearing the news, laughed hysterically and joked that billionaires must be running out of taste if they wanted the company's mascot of misfortune at their table. But the tone changed when the investors' representatives arrived unannounced. They walked straight past executives who extended their hands, ignoring titles and smiles. Their leaders scanned the room until his eyes stopped on me. He raised a finger and said firmly, "That's him. He comes with us." In that instant, chairs squeaked, confidence dissolved, and the entire structure of the office shifted like a building struck at its foundation. People who had mocked me now stared in disbelief. The VP attempted to intervene, insisting there must be some misunderstanding, but his voice cracked under the weight of uncertainty. Vanessa's laughter died in her throat. She watched the scene unfold with a stunned expression, her arrogance shrinking in real time. When the men in suits requested access to financial records and historical contracts, the board realized this wasn't a courtesy visit, it was an audit. A deep one. Suddenly, the ring everyone ridiculed wasn't a piece of cheap jewelry. It had become a symbol they didn't understand. The conference room felt unnaturally cold as everyone took their seats. Executives who normally bragged about their networking power sat stiff and alert, unsure why a billionaire of global influence had requested a private meeting with such urgency. The VP adjusted his tie repeatedly, attempting to mask growing anxiety. Vanessa hovered near the door, pretending not to care, though her restless glances betrayed curiosity. She expected entertainment, not consequence. Then the door opened. The billionaire stepped inside, not with the pomp or theatrics often associated with extreme wealth, but with a presence so quiet it demanded attention. He wore a simple tailored suit, devoid of logos or ostentation, and carried nothing but a sleek leather folder. There was no entourage, no assistants, no staged entrance. His composure created an authority none of the board members could manufacture, no matter how many bonuses they flaunted. He walked past the CEO without stopping, past department heads who extended eager hands, and past Vanessa, who shrank into silence. He approached me directly, offering a firm handshake infused with familiarity, not formality. Before anyone could process what they were seeing, he delivered a sentence that detonated every assumption in that building. "I was your father's business partner. Where you go, my money goes." The room froze. Air seemed to evaporate. Spreadsheets, titles, and office gossip became irrelevant in a single breath. The VP's expression collapsed into confusion, followed by dread as he realized the implications. Vanessa, who once mocked my ring as worthless, looked like she had swallowed her laughter. Her smirk dissolved, replaced by a tremble she could not hide. Her world, built on unearned privilege, cracked before her eyes. The CEO attempted to recover composure, stuttering a welcome, but the billionaire barely acknowledged him. He continued speaking, explaining how silent investors shape nations, not companies, and how my father's partnership was responsible for successes the board proudly claimed as their own. Every boast, every memo, every celebration had been anchored in a legacy none of them respected enough to research. In that moment, perceptions flipped. I wasn't an employee wearing a cheap ring. I was heir to alliances that outlived salaries and job titles. The board hadn't underestimated a man, they had underestimated history. The realization was brutal and irreversible. They hadn't mocked jewelry. They had mocked the foundation of the empire that fed them. The board sat frozen as the billionaire placed a thick folder on the table. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The weight of the documents spoke louder than anger ever could. The VP, who had spent years boasting about his financial genius, leaned forward with forced confidence. That confidence vanished the moment the billionaire opened the folder and slid the first page across the polished wood surface. Numbers, signatures, transactions, each line exposed a truth the company had ignored for far too long. For years, the VP had manipulated internal budgets, redirected funds into personal ventures, and doctored spreadsheets to hide his financial gymnastics. Promotions were blocked not because employees lacked skill, but because he feared competition. Projects were delayed or canceled when they did not align with his private interests. His authority wasn't leadership, it was a shield he used to protect his ego and preserve power. The board had trusted him blindly, letting him shape policies and decisions that defined careers. Now they realized trust had been traded for illusions. The billionaire continued, revealing contract discrepancies that traced directly back to the VP. These were not minor errors or administrative oversights. They were calculated moves driven by greed. One project alone had cost the company millions due to unauthorized amendments. Another was tied to international partners who had begun questioning the company's professional integrity. The VP's arrogance had placed the company's reputation on the edge of financial collapse. Vanessa stood behind her father, her face drained of its usual color. The same tongue that once mocked me now remained trapped behind clenched teeth. Screenshots of her posts, jokes, and memes were attached to the documents as proof of hostile workplace behavior, evidence that could be interpreted as intimidation, harassment, and character defamation. Her laughter, once her weapon, had become the final nail in her father's coffin. The board members shifted uncomfortably. Everything they thought was stable had been built on sand. They weren't confronting personalities anymore. They were confronting mathematics, cold, precise, undeniable. No opinion could argue against signed documents. No excuse could alter numbers etched into financial records. The billionaire closed the folder and said the words that ended any illusion remaining in that room. The VP wasn't simply incompetent, he was a liability. And liabilities don't get forgiven. They get removed. Silence followed, thick and suffocating, as the truth settled like dust after an explosion. A month later, the company held another gala. The venue hadn't changed, but everything else had. The chandeliers still sparkled, the champagne still flowed, and the orchestra played familiar notes, yet the air carried a tension thick enough to taste. Conversations were quieter. Laughter was cautious. People spoke in half sentences, unsure which alliances still stood and which reputations had evaporated overnight. When the lights dimmed and the spotlight hit the stage, the crowd expected the usual parade of self-congratulation. But instead of a confident executive boasting about profits and innovation, Vanessa stood alone at the podium. Gone were the diamonds, designer dresses, and smug smile. Her posture sagged under invisible weight. Her father, once the company's immovable force, was absent, suspended, and awaiting legal review. Vanessa wasn't introduced as a rising star or influential figure. She was introduced as the subject of an internal audit. Screens behind her displayed the frozen status of her luxury initiatives, shopping applications, branded events, and influencer partnerships, each stamped with large red labels, review pending. Executives who once praised her ideas now leaned back in their chairs, hoping distance would erase association. The same colleagues who once giggled with her now avoided eye contact, terrified of being tied to a sinking ship. Not a single glass was raised in her honor. No applause punctuated the air. This wasn't celebration. It was inventory. Her life, once a gallery of indulgence, had become a report of liabilities. Investigators had seized her accounts, traced unusual transfers, and reviewed spending tied to unauthorized company resources. Every purchase, every frivolous expense, every entitled request was now a bullet point in a legal document. Vanessa's voice trembled as she attempted a speech, but words failed her. She wasn't royalty anymore. She was collateral, her image stripped of privilege and replaced with responsibility she never learned to carry. The absence of her father beside her was louder than any accusation. He wasn't protecting her now. He was busy confronting the consequences of his actions. Meanwhile, whispers drifted across the ballroom, not about scandal, but about me. The same mouths that once mocked my ring now spoke my name with caution and curiosity. Respect doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives quietly, replacing laughter with acknowledgement. Arrogance, once displayed like jewelry, had been repossessed. The hierarchy had inverted. This wasn't a fall from grace. It was the invoice arrogance forgot to pay. The meeting that followed Vanessa's downfall felt strangely quiet. The board members sat around the table, avoiding eye contact, as if proximity could transfer guilt. Their proposal was clear. They wanted me to take the VP's office, inherit the responsibilities, and become the new face of authority. The salary was generous, the benefits unmatched, and the prestige undeniable. Yet the room felt heavy, as though the walls themselves were saturated with the residue of arrogance and misguided ambition. I listened politely, but my answer was already formed long before they finished speaking. Power acquired through someone else's collapse has no roots. It's a trophy, not an achievement. Accepting their offer would have chained me to a chair built from another man's failures. I thanked them for the opportunity and declined. A few jaws dropped, others blinked in disbelief. They expected ambition, not discernment. They misunderstood my silence from the beginning and still hadn't learned its meaning. My path wasn't upward, it was forward. Days later, I registered a consultancy company with a name inspired by the lessons my father taught me. It wasn't flashy, but it had purpose. I didn't need a skyscraper office or glossy pamphlets. All I required was credibility, and I had more of it now than anyone who once questioned my worth. The billionaire contacted me the moment my business went public. He didn't ask for a pitch. He simply said, "Your father trusted you. I will too." That single statement became my launchpad. Within weeks, my portfolio grew into something the previous VP could never comprehend. I was no longer tied to one corporation's politics. I was advising firms that valued judgment over noise. Executives sought my counsel not because of titles, but because I knew the difference between value and vanity. The ring that once triggered laughter became a symbol of access, an introduction to rooms where decisions shaped economies. I never raised my voice to prove my worth. I never plotted revenge or orchestrated payback. Time did the heavy lifting. Pride crumbled under exposure. Reputation rebuilt itself through action. Vanessa mocked what she didn't understand. In doing so, she opened doors she was never meant to touch. My father didn't leave me wealth. He left me clarity. The ring wasn't jewelry. It was a compass pointed toward destiny. And while others chased applause, I followed direction. Judgment was the inheritance they never expected.